Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing with the talk, Everything That Arises Passes Away. This is from Vol.3 of the anthology of Luang Por Sumedho's teachings. This is chapter 5 of this book, and this originally comes from the book This Is the Way It Is. It was published in about 1990 or 1991, and these talks come from the winter retreat of 1988. So this is the last part of the talk, Everything That Arises Passes Away. I'm really shocked and amazed by many religious people, Christians, Buddhists, or whatever, who seem to be ignorant regarding the practice of their religion. Few people seem to have any perspective on religious doctrine and belief and disbelief. They don't bother to find out. They're still trying to describe the indescribable, limit the unlimited, know the unknowable, and not many look at the way that they are. They believe what somebody else has told them. In Theravada Buddhism, monks will tell you that you can't get enlightened these days. There's no way you can even attain stream entry, the first stage of sainthood. Those days are past. They believe enlightenment is such a remote possibility that they don't even put forth much effort to see that all that arises passes away. So monks can spend lifetimes reading books and translating suttas, but believing that they're unenlightened and it's impossible to become enlightened. But then, what's the point of religion anyway? Why bother if the ultimate truth is so remote, such an unlikely possibility? In that case, we might become like anthropologists, sociologists, or philosophers, just discussing comparative religion. So what Luang Por is pointing to here is how we can take those kind of, say, communally agreed judgments, and that was certainly the case in Thailand. I'm not sure about other countries, but 100 years or so ago, it was believed that the age of the arahants is over, and no one can become enlightened these days. And the best thing we can do is to make merit, practice, study the teachings, practice, and do meritorious, wholesome actions, and to cultivate good karma so that then we can be reborn in the time when there's the next Buddha, the Maitreya Buddha has come along, and then things will be much more ripe and it'll be an age of arahants once again. And so that kind of belief was a common, common understanding or common perception in Thailand, at least a couple of hundred years ago. And so great teachers like Venerable Ajahn Mun and his many disciples like Ajahn Chaj and Mahabua and others, they spent a lot of time and energy saying, this is just an idea, or that if it wasn't possible, why do the teachings describe the ways and means whereby we can work with our minds, watch our minds, train the mind, and enlightenment can be realized. And so that a lot of the Thai forest tradition, the effort was focused around encouraging people to realize that the idea that the age of enlightenment is over, or you can't become an arahant in these days, that's just a perception, not something that has to be believed. And particularly, also, it was the case in Thailand that it was felt that lay people shouldn't meditate, that it was not safe or wasn't appropriate. And again, many of the forest ajahns spent a lot of time encouraging lay people to practice meditation and to see that the Dhamma teaching was as relevant and as accessible to them as to monastics. And I think similarly in Myanmar, there was a lot of effort from the 1950s onwards in particular to encourage the lay people to be practicing meditation and not seeing that was something out of their reach or something that they couldn't make use of. And it can be quite, say, obstructive how we can underestimate our own abilities, our own skills, or how things are for us, even just because of the way that we name things. We say, oh, there's. I remember many years ago I was living in a monastery, and there was one of the junior monks was talking with some lay people. The lay people had come to visit, and the Ajahn wasn't about at that time. So this junior monk was talking to the lay people, and they were asking questions about meditation. And this junior monk made these comments that, well, in the suttas, in the books, it talks a lot about absorption and jhana. The lay people who had come were asking about those questions. And just as one of the lay people was here the other day, I think Roman had a question about jhana, and similarly they said, well, what about this? You hear so much of what this is, how this is spoken of in the teachings, and how do you relate to that? And so this junior monk said, oh, well, personally, I don't know anything about jhana. I've never had any kind of jhana-like experience, but in the books it says this and this and this. And then at that time, then the Ajahn showed up and joined in the conversation. And then after the lay people had gone, he turned to the junior monk and said, what do you mean that you don't know anything about jhana? Don't be ridiculous. And this junior monk said, huh? What are you talking about? He said, well, you couldn't possibly sit as still and as quietly as you do, and have your breath go so still. I sit next to you all the time. You couldn't possibly sit that still as you do, if you hadn't reached at least first or second jhana. Don't be stupid. And then for that, it was a very interesting dialogue, because for that junior monk, it's like, oh, really? God. Wow. But, me, a swan? And then the story of the ugly duckling. And it was a very interesting dialogue, because from the external point of view, the Ajahn, who had more experience in these things, he could see that, well, no, this person's meditation is quite well established, quite refined. His concentration is quite good. But the junior monk himself had ranked things in. I'm not good at jhana, or that's not something I'm interested in. Ajahn Sumedho doesn't emphasize that. But I do my best with the meditation. I concentrate as well as I can. But it's not jhana or anything like that. And that he'd been labeling it in that way, and sort of regarding the mind state in that way. But from the outside, it looked very, very different. So it was not that I want to cause any of you to suddenly think, oh, maybe I should check with one of the Ajahns and see if they can assess me from the outside. So I don't want to feed that particular perception. But to me, it was a very helpful dialogue, and in the context of what Luang Por is saying here, it's important to know how we name things, how we label what we're doing, how we label how things are, and what we take for granted, the beliefs that we have, the assumptions that we make, and the kind of the labels we put on things, the form that we give things, because a lot of that can be unconscious. We can be setting limitations or seeing things in a particular way. Well, that can't be good because it doesn't fit my preferred way of categorizing goodness, or that's irrational because it doesn't match my particular set of preferred beliefs. And yet, not realizing that, well, what you're calling rational or an irrational is possibly just one perspective. It's not necessarily the whole story. And that this way of using investigation and wise reflection on our own opinions, our own points of view, our own beliefs, our own doubts, and seeing how the mind creates those and invests those with value, that's a very helpful part of the practice. And just being able to recognize, oh, well, this is how my mind frames it. This is how my mind labels things. This is what my mind calls good and valuable, and says this is what my mind says is a bit of a waste of time, or or any of the many and various kinds of judgments that the mind makes. So it's helpful bringing attention to that, and then challenging the assumptions and judgments that the mind makes. So to continue, Gautama the Buddha was one whose wisdom came from observing nature, the conditions of mind and body. That's not impossible for any of us to do. We have minds and bodies. All we have to do is watch them. It's not as if we have to have special powers to do that, or that somehow this time is a different time from that of Gautama the Buddha. Time is an illusion caused by ignorance. People in the time of Gautama the Buddha were no different from people now. They had greed, hatred and delusion, egos, conceits and fears, just like people nowadays. If you start thinking about Buddhist doctrines, different levels of attainment, you'll just get into a state of doubting. You don't have to check yourself with a list in a book, but just know for yourself until no condition of body or mind deludes you. As with many of the Dhamma talks in this book, there are a lot of very insightful comments, statements, observations by Luang Por Sumedho. And this one simple sentence, time is an illusion caused by ignorance. You could probably sit on that for the next 2 or 3 months, just to let that really sink in. Time is an illusion caused by ignorance. So we can say it's now 6:13 in the evening, and it's Saturday, the 23rd of January. We have these numbers, and the sense of passing time. I've been reading for about 12 or 13 minutes since this session began, and we have about an hour for these sessions. We're now about 3 weeks into the retreat. All these ways of framing time. But just taking a reflection like this of Luang Por's, time is an illusion caused by ignorance. That carries a lot with it. And in this context, talking about how the minds of people nowadays are really very much the same as the minds of people in the time of Gautama the Buddha. And along with greed, hatred, and delusion, then minds are also capable of concentration, of kindness, of compassion, of the cultivation of wisdom, and the Dhamma that was realizable in the time of the Buddha is as realizable and is as akaliko, is as timeless. It's necessarily as timeless then, as timeless now as it was then. That if we take that seriously, that time is an illusion caused by ignorance, and that the Dhamma is akaliko, is timeless, how could the Dhamma that is realizable here and now, how could that be any different from in any other era? If that fundamental reality of all things is timeless, then time doesn't apply. It's one of those structures built around perception and the conditioned realm that the mind easily believes in and forms, say, perceptions and structures. But it's one of those things. It's very helpful to see how the mind creates these fixed and definite limits and frameworks, and it's the sort of thing when Luang Por Chah would say, he'd pick up something and say, is this big or small? So if you compare this to the size of the building, this little gadget is quite small. If you compare it to an atom, it's really big. So is it big or small? What is it? And then similarly with time, you can say, the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago. That was a long time ago. Well, compared to what? And they can say, well, the universe expanded incredibly rapidly, and so from a single point, then the universe expanded from the Big Bang to how large it is now, immeasurably vast now, but vast compared to what? And we say 13.8 billion years ago. Well, that's a long time Compared to what? Or you say, well, the universe expanded incredibly rapidly, so that within the first sort of 10 to the minus 38 of a second, then the universe expanded to so many meters across in that first microscopic instant. You say, well, 10 to the minus 38 of a second, that's a really short period of time. Is it? Compared to what? If time had just begun, we say, well, that's a really short. I mean, that's like a microsecond. That's a really short time, but compared to what? What are you measuring it against? And not to get too lost into into astrophysics or particle physics and such like, I feel it's useful to be doing these kind of mind experiments, thought experiments, and to say, oh no, that's right. Well, I call this big, I call this small, but is that really the case? That's only because of the conditioning of perceptions. If your mind is really bright and clear, and the body is free of pain, how fast does an hour of meditation go by? It's just can be really quick. If you're say you're aching and your mind is filled with miserable states and is raging about something or is anxious about something, and you're really in a middle of a lot of mental turmoil. You can take a look at your watch and think, oh my goodness, it's only been 7 minutes. What? Another 53 minutes to go till the end of the hour? No, I can't. Yeah. So just those 7 minutes have already felt like an eternity. So how long is the meditation? Is it just gone by in a flash, or is it in an eternity? So when Luang Por makes this kind of a statement, time is an illusion caused by ignorance, I feel it's really one of those areas to explore and to see how we take identity and time and place to be so fixed, so solid. I am this person, I'm sitting here, time is passing, it's now 19 minutes and 23, 24, 25 seconds past 6. We take these perceptions as so solid and permanent and absolute, and a lot of the development of insight is in exactly the challenging of that, and the beliefs that we have, and the conditioning of our perceptual processes as we have them. Also, within that, and the other comment that Luang Por makes here that I would highlight, if you start thinking about Buddhist doctrines, different levels of attainment, you'll just get into a state of doubting. You don't have to check yourself with a list in a book, but just know for yourself until no condition of body or mind deludes you. So that sense of judging, where am I at? Have I managed to reach first jhana, second jhana? Have I reached stream entry? Have I not? Where am I? What level have I reached? And that the way the mind creates those kind of structures in solid forms, and then so easily identifies with them. What have I reached? Where am I at? What have I got? That subtle kind of conceiving the self-creation around those qualities of experience. They work extremely fast. They're very, very subtle, very fast, very convincing. And so that I feel it's helpful, so that Luang Por brings that in, and it's a very regular theme. So basically, don't bother thinking about those levels of attainment. Just like the junior monk I was talking about, that after having been told that by the Ajahn, it did have a bit of a ripple effect on his mind. It's like, oh wow, well that's something, But that did subside after a bit. But I feel that just being ready to recognize that, well, that's a set of structures. Yeah, they have a certain validity, but we don't have to build our life around them. We don't have to make that particularly solid or important. That's not something that necessarily has to be given a lot of significance. And then with that kind of relaxed attitude, then it's much easier to see when the conceiving mind, that manyati, the conceiving, I-making and mind making happens around that. That's easier to spot because the mind is looking at it all in a much more easeful and relaxed way. People say to me, I can't do all that. I'm just an ordinary person, a layman. When I think of doing all that, I realize I can't do it. It's too much for me. I say, if you think about it, you can't do it. That's all. Don't think about it. Just do it. Thought only takes you to doubt. People who just think about life can't do anything. If it's worth doing, do it. When you become depressed, learn from depression. When you fall sick, learn from sickness. When you're happy, learn from happiness. These are all opportunities to learn in the world. Keep silently listening and watching as a way of life. Then you begin to understand the conditions. There's nothing to fear. You don't have to get anything. You don't have to get anything that you don't have already, and there's nothing to get rid of. I think this, since this talk was given in 1988, that was before Nike chose the "Just Do It" slogan for their trainers, their running shoes. But it was also a very common expression of Luang Por Chah. It's like, don't think about it, just do it. Don't debate with yourself whether you should or you shouldn't. Just do it. Just having that readiness to engage with the practice and to, as Luang Por puts it here, to be learning from everything. If you become depressed, learn from depression. If you fall sick, learn from sickness. If you're happy, learn from happiness. So then, and then the culmination of that, keep watching and listening as a way of life. Then the more that the mind awakens to that realization, there's nothing that has to be acquired that you haven't got. There's no thing that can be got that you haven't got already, and there's nothing to get rid of that you're intrinsically burdened with. The more that the mind awakens to its own nature as Dhamma, then there's nothing to get, nothing to add to the Dhamma, and nothing to shed from the Dhamma. That is a quality that is whole and complete in and of itself. So, any questions, thoughts, comments, reflections? Gaspar, want to come and get the microphone?
Thank you. So I'm just curious with respect to the dynamics of awareness during sleep. I just had a quick nap ahead of this reading, and I remember setting the alarm for about 20 minutes, and then I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I was like, oh, it's like 20 minutes that has passed, and the experience was, I don't know, it's like maybe 2 minutes of sleep. So I'm just wondering, in terms of what is awareness doing in sleep? If you can comment on that, thank you.
Yeah. So there's a few different aspects to that. One is that what you find in the suttas, and also the kind of instruction that Ajahn Chah would give, is the Buddha says when he was going to go to sleep, he would set in mind the time to awaken, and then lie down on his right side, and then mindfully fall asleep, and then would wake up at the time that his mind had sort of put in place. And so that what you're also describing, I experience that quite regularly with a sort of with a midday nap in particular. And if the mind is just letting go, usually if I do that, it's about almost exactly 17 minutes. It's more than 15 and less than 20. The mind sort of dips out of consciousness, and then has it sort of goes into sleep state, and then comes out of that. And often I have that same kind of experience. It's like, oh, well, I'm awake and I feel refreshed, so I probably just had my 17 minutes of sleep. And then I look at the clock, and lo and behold, that amount of time has gone by, and that I feel that's a sort of natural sort of one quick dip into a sleep cycle to give the system a necessary or helpful rest, and then can click back into activity. In a way, it's rather like the camera that you have here, that if it's operating and it's doing its recording, then the red light is on. If it's switched on but it's not recording, then the green light is on. So it's on. It's got its power supply, but it's just the recording function isn't happening. And so our mind body system seems to work in a similar way, that the awareness is still present, but it's just not engaged during the time of a sleep cycle. It's very interesting if you study the psychology of sleep, and also I think just in ordinary everyday circumstances, people notice how if you're fast asleep, but somebody mentions your name, then you'll wake up very, very quickly. They don't have to say your name very loudly, but you'll wake up very fast. Or if you hear a sound that's an unexpected sound, like a knock on the door or something like that, then again, it doesn't have to be particularly loud, but because it's unexpected, then the mind will come out of the sleep state. So the ears are working, the system is registering sensory activity, but it's just not engaged at that sort of personal consciousness level. When I lived at Abhayagiri Monastery, I was for about 8 years or so. I lived in a kuti. It was a straw made of straw bales, and it was quite small. And there was a sleeping platform that was suspended from the ceiling. It was like a pointed ceiling, and so it hung from the ceiling by 2 chains, and there was about an 8-foot drop from the edge of the sleeping platform down to the floor. And so all that was that was sort of preventing me from rolling off was the 2 chains. And I'm not very tall, I'm only about 5'8". So, and the gap between the chains was only about maybe 5 feet. So it was really interesting how. And I would climb up a little ladder and then sleep up there. So I lived up there and slept up there for. I didn't live on the platform. I lived in the kuti and I slept up on the platform for 7 or 8 years, maybe 9 years. And it was very interesting how I could be fast asleep, and if my elbow went over the edge, I woke up really, really quickly. I didn't suffer from any anxiety or sort of feel like, I wonder if I'm going to fall off tonight. It didn't really sort of come into my mind like that. But it was interesting how the signal was extremely clear and acute. If something there was a space underneath an elbow or my foot or whatever it might be, that the whole system was geared. Okay, there's an 8-foot drop that you could be making very quickly. I never fell off it, but it was. I felt it was a good exercise in mindful sleeping, so that you're resting and fully asleep, but the body and the mind are also geared to the situation that you're in. So I think I feel like that's how it works. There can be sleep states where you're conscious of sleeping, and so I've experienced that a few times. Usually, when doing what's called the sitter's practice, the practice of not lying down to sleep, that sometimes the mind goes into a sleep state, and you can the breathing changes to a whole different rhythm, and that you're sleeping. But there's a full conscious awareness. There's a sense of, I am sleeping, so that there is a not being in a dream state, but there's a wakeful awareness whilst the body is doing its sleeping cycle. So I haven't had that many times, but a few times, and it's quite restful. You do feel fully refreshed at the end of sleeping like that. But it is kind of weird. It's like, I'm wide awake, I'm sleeping. And that having those two things side by side, so it's uncommon, and I wouldn't say I've developed that in any kind of extensive way. But I get the impression from some comments that Luang Por Chah made about his own practice, was that he could do that fairly easily, that he could sort of dip into a sleep state for a short period of time and just sort of switch off and kind of let the system refresh itself, and then sort of kick into action in the sort of full wakeful awareness once again. So just from a few comments that he's made, it seems like he was quite adept at being able to do that. And he was very active as a teacher and was often receiving people from and engaged in activities many, many hours a day. And so that ability to have a kind of mindful catnap was something that was obviously very, very useful to him. So I hope there's some helpful comments there. Any questions about the reading or any of the aspects of that? Yes, Anagarika Evgenia.
I was wondering about the phrase, until your body and mind couldn't delude you, that sometimes it's could be quite tricky. I find sometimes it's hard to understand the difference between action driven by becoming or action kind of more skillful coming from Dhamma, especially around practice. You kind of doing the right thing, but then by the results you understand that, it was definitely achieving becoming and conceit. So it's kind of, you realize how your mind deluded you only when you already get a quite painful results. So to understand it a bit early on, how to not be deluded by these strong habits of becoming, achieving, even if in the beginning it doesn't feel like this, but by the results you see that it was definitely.
Yeah, good question. I think it's certainly in the early years of Dhamma practice, it's very, very, very difficult to make that distinction. Also, just the habits of taking everything personally or coming from a very self-based place of action is very, very common. So one example of this that I often quote, and it's interesting that again, if you read Ajahn Chah's teachings, is how when you start doing mindfulness of breathing, it can feel like just breathing is a real chore. It's really hard work, and by the action of paying attention to the breath, there's this me breathing. I'm doing the breath, and just by paying attention to it, it becomes quite hard work. And you think, wow. And this is how it was for me in the early years of meditation. Was I know I've been breathing my whole life, every day, all the time. But when I try to concentrate on the breath, it seems like this real kind of hard work. And like, have I been doing this every day my whole life? This is really a kind of a chore that's quite stressful and difficult to do. And so your rational mind says, I've been doing this all my life, but then the action of paying attention to the breath and trying to follow the breath, there's this whole lot of me doing it, me doing the breath. And it was interesting when reading Luang Por Chah's teachings that when he was a young monk or a novice and trying to meditate, he had exactly the same kind of experience. He would say, I used to work really hard on the farm and planting rice and harvesting the rice and looking after the water buffaloes and plowing with the water buffaloes, and that was I was breathing all day long, and the breathing was nothing. That was really easy. That was totally negligible. And now I don't have to look after the buffaloes or plow the fields, but just sitting here, just breathing is really hard work. This is really really burdensome. It's really stressful. But even though you see that and you recognize, oh, it's because the sense of me doing the breath or me doing the meditation, just by recognizing what's going on, that sense of I, the meditator, I'm breathing, I'm watching the breath, I'm working with the meditation. You can't just snap your fingers and make that attitude go away. It's like the conditioning for that is very, very strong. So what is the best thing to do? I found is to say, well, look at how much the sense of I, the meditator, me, the one who's meditating, me watching the breath, me doing the breathing. Look at the effect, feel the effect that has. So at least you're able to identify or look at the impact of that selfing. And the effort coming from me doing the breathing meditation. But you can't just break that habit. It's like the accent that you have with your speech, or the way that you walk, or the kind of conditioning that we have with our life, with our language, our mobility, the way that we work. Those things are deeply conditioned, strongly conditioned, and you can't just sort of decide for them to be different, and they change. It's like it takes time for things to adapt, and so for myself in those early years, I would say, well, ideally, the mind observes the body breathing, and it's not me doing the breath, but there's simply the awareness of the body breathing, and the awareness of the breath is not going to change the quality of the breath or the rhythm of the breath, and it certainly will just know the body breathing comfortably and naturally and easily. But to be honest, it took quite a few years to even have that experience once in a while. It was quite a few years of me doing the meditation, me doing mindfulness of breath, me the breather, rather than here is the body breathing and the mind just letting the breath sort of rest upon the attention like a. I used to use an image like if you had a soft feather, like a downy feather, a little fluffy feather resting on the palm. Like that, you should try to let the breath rest upon the attention like a downy feather resting on the palm of your hand. Just creating a mental image rather than me, the breather, me doing the breath meditation. And so I would use that kind of like a mental image like that, or just naming what was going on. Or here's the impact of me doing the breathing rather than the body breathing on its own and the mind being aware of it. Me doing mindfulness of the breath. It feels like this. So that at least that's being clarified what's going on. It's like noticing your accent, or noticing the way that you walk, or noticing a habitual form that we have. So that then over time, by consistently bringing awareness to that, or like you're asking about how the making of effort can be free of self-view and I want to get and I want to get rid of, at least you're finding your own ways to clarify that. Oh, here's the Evgenia is trying to get something again feeling. That's what this is. It has this tone, this quality. This is the me trying to get something feeling, or here's the me trying to get rid of something feeling. It's like this, and then in the moments where that relaxes, then or like I would find for myself, like with mindfulness of breathing, when in those moments where it's just the body breathing on its own, and the mind is aware of it. Look at that, feel that, know that, and letting that be fully conscious, or as conscious as possible. What it's like when the effort is being applied without that sort of quality of self-view and conceit and such like, so that there's a conscious appreciation of how effort can be made, free of that me trying to become or me trying to get rid of. So it is ridiculous amounts of patience are necessary. more patience than you'd like to have to use. Seriously, it takes like learning any skill, like learning a language or a musical instrument or chanting or Pali language or knitting or any kind of skill. It takes a long time to develop a skill. And but I feel that just getting to know the tensing quality of I have to become, or I want to become, or I want to get rid of, just getting to know that the bhava feeling. It's almost like you're recognizing a particular sound or a smell or a particular form. It's like, oh, it's that it's that smell again. It's that taste. I know that taste, and that then is being recognized. That I making and mind making. That's being noticed, and the very fact of it being noticed means it can't delude or drive things in the same way that it normally would. In a way, it's like the "I know you, Mara" dialogue from the scriptures, where the mind is aware of this is the I want to become, I want to get rid of. That's what this is. The texture of it, the taste of it. It's that taste again, and so when it's known, it loses its power to delude. So that you can see it operating. You can't just stop it by an act of will, but at least you know what's going on. You know that the effort is being, say, coloured by that, or say, taken over by those attitudes. So I hope that's helpful. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, the next talk is called the Five Kundas. So this has got another talk with a great wealth of Dhamma material in it. So I'll just make a start on this today. But there's a lot of very valuable, wonderful teachings. It's a real treasure house, as many of the talks are in this book. And it's chapter 6, the Five Kundas. As long as these human bodies are alive and their senses are operating, we have to be constantly on our guard, alert and mindful, because the force of habit of grasping the sensual world as a self is so strong. This is very strong conditioning in all of us. So the way the Buddha taught is the way of mindfulness and wise reflection. Rather than making metaphysical statements about true nature or ultimate reality, the Buddha's teaching points to the condition of grasping. That's the only thing that keeps us from enlightenment. Buddha wisdom is an understanding of the way things are through observing oneself rather than observing how the stars and planets operate. We don't go out looking at the trees and contemplating nature as if they were an object of our vision, but we actually observe nature as it operates through our personal form. So that, that sense of looking at the way things are, not in terms, not belittling the world of say scientific discovery or observing the planet and the ecosystem around us, but recognizing that when we're talking about the way things are, or studying nature, it's important to recognize that we are part of nature. Everything that we are is part of the natural order, and it's one of those things that people often say in societies, or I like to be out in nature. And it's a very sort of common and understandable, natural thing to say, no pun intended. But I always feel that, well, how can you get away from nature? That everything that you are, your body, your mind, every idea, every emotion, every memory is part of the natural order. So we can't really get away from nature. Every aspect of our experiential process of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching is all part of nature. We can't. I know what people mean when they mean I like to be out in nature is sort of away from human constructions, like away from buildings, away from towns, away from other people. That's what they mean when they use that kind of a phrase. But I feel it's also a way that we sort of divorce ourselves from nature, or somehow we feel that we are apart from that, or we've got to get. We've been separated from nature, and we've got to get back into it. And even though that's understandable, and I can appreciate where that comes from, it's good to look at that perception of alienation, or that sense of otherness. And in a way, I feel it's one of the ways in which the mind grasps at the feeling of self, and that feeling of I am separate from nature. I want to be reunited with nature, or I'm apart from things, and then it reflects itself, or it manifests as a kind of loneliness or alienation that we can experience. And I remember there was I forget how I heard the story, but I didn't actually hear this conversation myself, but someone recounted it to me. At the Buddhist Society summer school, they used to have an annual gathering for a couple of weeks. It used to be in a place called High Lee in Hoddesdon here in Hertfordshire. About 120 people, members of the Buddhist Society, would gather every year for a couple of weeks in this sort of very fine building with beautiful grounds in Hoddesdon. And they would have teachers from the Theravada tradition, Zen tradition, Tibetan tradition, and other spiritual teachers like Firoz Mehta was often teaching there. And the people who participated in the summer school would have different classes, different sessions during the day, and every evening there was a sort of plenary talk. Everyone who was there for the summer school would gather in the big hall, and somebody would give a talk for the whole group to listen to. And they're often very inspiring and eloquent, really wonderful teachers like Firoz Mehta, I mentioned before, Trevor Leggett, who's a Zen teacher, a very wonderful teacher. Luang Por Sumedho would often give Dhamma talks, or Myo Kyoni, a Zen teacher from London, would give these evening talks. And so on one particular occasion, after the evening talk was over, people would often, it would be in the summertime, say August or September, and people would spill out of the French windows around the main hall and gather in the gardens. And so on particular occasion, after an especially inspiring and elevating Dhamma talk, a couple of people were out in the courtyard outside of the hall, and one person was looking up at the sky and said, "Wouldn't it be extraordinary to be out there amongst the stars, just so flying through space, just with nothing around you other than the kind of vast infinity of the void and the distant galaxies and stars all around you? Wouldn't that be extraordinary? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" And the other person next to him said, "Where do you think you are?" Oh, right. We are flying through space, surrounded by remote galaxies and stars. We are in the infinity of the void. We just happen to be perched on the surface of this little blue-green bubble. But we forget that, and so that was one of those unique little conversations that reflects. Oh yeah, we get very easily focused on our own particular condition, and we forget the larger context that we are part of that vast natural order, and that's inescapably the case. What we take ourselves to be can be classified as 5 aggregates or khandas. Rupa, form; Vedana, feelings; Sanya, perception; Sankhara, mental formations or thought processes; Vijnana, sense consciousness. They provide a skillful means of seeing all sensual phenomena in groups. The easiest to meditate on is the Rupa Khanda, the form of your own body, because it's stuck to the ground, heavy, gross. It's a slower moving thing than all the mental phenomena, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara or Vijnana. You can reflect on your own body for long periods of time, meditate on the breath rather than on consciousness, because it's within our ability to concentrate on breathing. Ordinary people can contemplate their own breath. You can contemplate the feeling of your own eyes. They have sensations. Contemplate the tongue, the wetness of the mouth, or your tongue touching the palate in your mouth. You can contemplate the body as a sense organ, giving you the sensations of pleasure and pain, heat and cold. Just observe what the feeling of cold or heat in the body is like. You can contemplate that because it's not what you are. It's an object you can see. You can easily observe as if it was something separate from yourself. If you don't do that, you just tend to react. When you're too hot, you try to get cooler, take off your jumper. Then you get cold and you put it back on again. You can just react to those sensations of pleasure and pain in the body. Pleasure, oh, isn't that wonderful? And you try to hold on to it. To have more pleasure. And pain, oh, get rid of that. And you run away from anything uncomfortable or painful. But in meditation, we can see these sensations, and the body itself is a sensual condition that has pleasure and pain, heat and cold. You can reflect on the forms that you see. Just look at something beautiful like flowers. Flowers are probably the most beautiful things on the earth, and so we like flowers. So note, when you look at a flower, how you're drawn to it, being attracted to what is pleasing to the eye. Or look at something that is unpleasant to the eye, say excrement. When you see excrement, cow dung on the path, you politely ignore it. Look at your own excrement. We produce it ourselves, and yet it's something that we don't really want to go around showing to other people. It's something we'd rather nobody ever saw us producing. You don't really feel drawn to going to look at it like you would a flower, do you? But we're quite willing to wear flowers, carry flowers around, have flowers on our shrine. It's not that you should find excrement attractive. I'm just pointing out that you can meditate on this force of the sensory world. It's a natural force. It's not bad or wrong, but you can meditate on it to see how you tend to react to sensory experiences. When you experience beautiful sounds or horrible ones, pleasant odors or stinking ones, pleasant tastes or unpleasant ones, pleasurable physical sensations or painful ones, heat and cold, meditate on these things. Look and see these things as they are. All rupa is impermanent. Beautiful flowers are only beautiful for a while, then they become repulsive. So we observe this natural transformation from what is fresh and beautiful to what is old, ugly. I was a lot prettier when I was 20. Now I'm old and ugly. He was 54 at the time, 10 years younger than I am. An old human body is not very beautiful, but it's the body following what it's supposed to do. I'm glad mine is not getting prettier. It would be embarrassing if it was. So this is beginning the reflections on the 5 khandas and Rupa Khanda, form. So the Rupa doesn't just refer to our own physical body, but physical form of all kinds. And so that Rupa can be the form of the building, or the form of a book, or the form of the planet and the stars. It's all some material form that's made up of the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. And the way that Luang Por is talking about it also reflects the fact that when we speak of the 5 khandas, you can't really divide them up completely and absolutely from each other. There's just a convenient way of slicing the pie, so that you have the rupa slice, and then the material form, slice, and then Vedana, sensation or feeling, perception, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, mental formations, sankhara, emotions, memories, ideas, initiatives, motives, imagination, and then vijnana, so discriminative consciousness. And so that it's helpful to, even though we use the words sort of quite, and they can be quite specific in some respects, they do overlap a lot. And so just as in Luang Por's talking about rupa here, then also it's involving perception. You know, the form of a flower. You don't know what the form of a flower is unless you can see it. So there's the aspect of sanya, perception, there as well. And also every aspect of the world of form is known through various types of perception. So kaya vijnana, the body consciousness. And so forth, so that it's helpful on considering, understanding the five khandhas, that they overlap with each other a lot, and so that rather than say, well, where does rupa khandha end and where does sanya khandha begin? And okay, what is the vijnana khandha, and how do they connect? How do they overlap, and which is which? So I'm sure quite a few PhDs have been written over the years, and probably many authoritative books trying to sort of specify exactly how each of these is defined. But in many respects, it's just taking the word itself. A khandha is a lump or a heap. The word aggregate, again, it's one of those Buddhist jargon words that you get used to using, but in ordinary circumstances, aggregate, at least in English, tends to mean a kind of small stones that you use for making concrete with. It's a kind of building material. And that so that it's a Buddhist jargon word, but khandha means like a heap or a lump or a pile or a hill, like the town in Sri Lanka, Kandy, comes from the word kanda. It's on a hill. It's up in the hill country. It's a hilly place. So the word Kandy is like where the lumps are in the landscape. So it's a very sort of ordinary, everyday household term. And so the five heaps or the five groups, so it's like a convenient way of dividing up experience, but there is a lot of overlap. In particular, there's in one of the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Mahavedalla Sutta, which is a dialogue between Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahakotita. There's two suttas, the greater series of questions and answers and the lesser series, side by side. And so the Mahavedalla Sutta is number 43, I think, and the Chula is 44. So anyway, in the dialogue between Venerable Sariputta and Mahakotita, then there is this question about the different aspects of the khandhas. And then the question is asked: perception, feeling, and consciousness, are they conjoined or are they disjoined? Are they separate? Can you completely distinguish one from another, or do they overlap? Are they conjoined or are they disjoined? And then Venerable Sariputta replies, they are conjoined. They're not disjoined, because that which we feel, we perceive, that which we perceive, we cognize, and you can't completely discriminate one from another. And so I feel that gives us a very good lead on the area. And so rather than encouraging the mind getting lost in doubt and confusion about exactly what's the difference between sanya, so perceiving, so how is that different from vijnana? If you have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and so on, mind consciousness, how is that different? How do you draw the line? So just seeing that it's it's like if you have a pie or a pizza. There's how do you slice up the pie? How do you slice up the pizza? You just take a knife and you slice it into a convenient number of pieces according to the people that are there and who might want a piece of pie. And so it's just a convenient way of slicing up the field of experience. So that as we have like in the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha uses the model of the five khandhas, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. In the fire sermon, he uses the model of the six senses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So it's a six-slice pie rather than a five-slice pie, but it's just another convenient way of slicing up the field of experience to explore it and to reflect upon and to understand it more fully. So, are there any? The speaking of time being an illusion caused by ignorance is now the illusion of 2 minutes past 7 already. So, time has gone by. But any final questions, thoughts? Roman, yes, want to come and get the microphone.
Ajahn, I have a question with regards to the relationship of identity and the khandhas. There needs to be continuity, and since there is no self, the selfing requires an energy to create something which doesn't exist. So the selfing constantly creates the illusion of self, and that takes some portion of our energy. So how do we relax that sort of identity making, because those are all processes, the consciousness, and so the selfing also is a process. And I wonder how we can, which line of inquiry would kind of dissipate that energy so that we could see more clearly that the identity is being made and upheld while our experience is going on.
Well, I think that the short answer is mindfulness and wisdom, or mindfulness and wise reflection. So that because those feelings of self, the ahankara, mamankara, that they're also just mental formations. You know, it's just they're not absolutely real. It's just a particular pattern of attitude that forms for a period of time. So the feeling of self is not self. It's another one of the five khandhas. It's another aspect of the five khandhas that arises and passes away. So that the more that there is the quality of mindfulness and wisdom, and that can be supported by concentration and wise reflection and wise effort, that is the way that the self, the I-making and mind-making habit can be recognized, and then also, and can be then, having been recognized, can be let go of. So that it's but also it's going to vary from person to person exactly what is going to be effective, because the different sort of channels of attachment or different ways of grasping are going to vary from one person to another. But generally speaking, if as long as there's an understanding, there's like in a way the right view. There's the view that it's easy for the sense of self to form around the five khandhas, knowing that, and that needs something that needs to be looked out for, and then the effort and the mindfulness to say pay attention to follow up on that. Okay, this easily happens. Therefore, pay attention and sustain that attention to that. So that as it's said that right view, right effort, right mindfulness, that they circulate around. They have a particular importance in the practice. There are three elements of the Eightfold Path that have a specific importance in supporting the practice. So if they are say cultivated and strengthened, then that the ability to recognize that I-making and my-making can be noticed more quickly, more effectively, and can be let go of more quickly and more effectively. But the sense of self is not sacred or special in terms of mental formations. It's just a particularly effective at deluding the mind is particularly sort of convincing and sort of deeply rooted as a habit. But it's just another. The feeling of self is just another mental formation. Speaking of sleep, Gaspar had that question about sleep. One of the things I point out as a way of getting a perspective on this that's not even really related to meditation so much is that most people have the experience of particularly if you have a nap during the middle of the day, when you have that kind of a short but deep sleep, that when you wake up, you don't know where you are. Have you ever had that experience? So have you ever had the experience where you don't know what you are? That you wake up and you don't know what the mind is awake, but you don't know what you are. So it does happen from time to time. And so Sister Jayavira is nodding. I've certainly had it a few times. The mind is awake and you don't know what you are, and you have to reassemble the person. It's like, oh. And in that moment, there isn't a sense of self. The mind is awake, but there isn't a me there. And then just like remembering where you are, you have to, oh right, okay, the curtains. Oh right, I know, it's Amaravati. That's from time to time, the whole sense of self is not formed, and it's a very say natural and the kind of ideal opportunity to see how the sense of I isn't permanent. It's not substantial. The mind can be awake, can be fully aware, but not having a me there. There's visual objects and sound and so on, but the sense of me, this person, has to be reassembled, put together. And so that's an everyday example of seeing how that the sense of I is just another mental formation, but it's particularly convincing. And because of the depth of grasping and attachment to that, then it's hard to see. It's hard to recognize and hard to appreciate. Okay, so let's leave it there for today.